Hello and welcome to the Third Sector Podcast. I'm Andy Ricketts.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we're joined by the Chief Executive of the Children's Society. Mark Russell has been in post at the charity for the past 6 years, and before that he spent almost 13 years as Chief Executive of Church Army, a job he was appointed to at the age of 30. Hello Mark, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello, it's a real joy to be with you as well. Thanks for having me.
So you've been a charity Chief Executive for the best part of 20 years now.
That's right.
How are you finding things at the moment?
It is an extraordinary privilege to be the Chief Executive of a charity, to travel around the country and see the extraordinary things that people do to change the lives of children. In the case of our organisation, is an extraordinary privilege. But I think it's fair to say I've never known it to be this difficult to be a leader of a charity than it is today. There's been a constant stream of crises, one after the other. I started in 2019. I had 6 months of normality before COVID hit us all in 2020. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to be damned if it's on my watch that the Children's Society falls over. And we then had obviously all the years of crisis and COVID. In our case, we lost a third of our income because our shops were all shut. Then we had the cost of living crisis. We've had the war in Ukraine. We've had constant instability in Westminster and Whitehall. We've had increases in national insurance. It just felt like one major crisis after another. At the same time, more and more people need the services that charities are providing, and charities are under more and more pressure to deliver them. I've never known the sector to be a tougher place. I've seen over the last 2 or 3 years really significant leaders in our sector step back. And when I've spoken to them, they've usually always said the same thing, that they're exhausted, they're tired. It's just such a hard gig. So it's balancing that really incredible privilege of doing this job and being part of an organisation that changes the lives of children and young people, but at the same time recognising that it takes its toll and it's hard.
And thinking about your day-to-day work, activities and the demands on you, is there a big difference then now as opposed to back in 2018 when you were in your last year at Church Army, for example?
Yes, I think there is. And I was talking to somebody the other day about when you go on holiday now and you come back and you're still tired. And there's a sense of sort of like leaders have had their levels of resilience knocked out over the last number of years. As I was thinking about this podcast, I just wanted to be really honest and say that I know I've really found it hard. And I know that that's had an impact on my mental health. It's had an impact on my well-being, because ultimately you feel as a chief executive an overwhelming sense of responsibility to keep the show on the road and to make sure that, you know, the money comes in and people's wages are paid, that the children we serve get the best possible standard of care and support. But you also recognize the toll on your own life at the same time. And if I'm honest, the last 2 years have been the toughest of my professional life. I think if you've got a really tough time at work and you're struggling to make sure all your bills get paid and the budget balances and all the rest of it, if you've also got tough stuff going on outside of work, which I've had going on as well, in my wider family, you really feel your personal resilience really struggle. And that's been true for me. And I know that people listening to this will resonate with that, the real struggles of being a leader and the challenges of that. So I've had to be really intentional over the last couple of years around putting support in place, making sure that I'm looking after my mental health and my well-being. I've discovered that exercise and running and physical, pushing myself at the gym is what keeps my mental health in check. I've been very honest with my trustees. I've been very honest with my senior team, colleagues who work closest with me about what's going on in my life. And at that level, sometimes I think people think leaders have to be these sort of superheroes running around in a cape, and it's not. I think vulnerability is a phenomenal strength as a leader. And I've tried my best over the last couple of years, as things have been difficult for me, to be vulnerable and open and honest, but also talk about how I've got support. There are people probably listening to this who I've rung up on the phone and asked to have a chat with, who've been phenomenally supportive. And I think there's a solidarity and a camaraderie amongst chief execs of charities of all sizes, because we're all battled with the same stuff. You know, some people can look at us, you know, with a £45 million turnover and think, oh, well, it's all well for them. Try running my organisation. It's exactly the same stuff, the same struggles, the same challenges. The numbers are just different. And so it's really important for leaders to find ways to rebuild those reservoirs of resilience that have been emptied massively over the last few years.
And in terms of the boundaries that you need to put in place to just practically manage your week, and to make sure you do all the things that you've just spoken about in terms of managing your own mental health? How do you go about that?
You have to be really quite strict. So I have a very, very good assistant called Lindsay who organises my entire life. In fact, she's been with the Children's Society for 15 years. We've just celebrated her anniversary. And Lindsay's really good at making sure that I take my time. And in this job, because we have so many supporters who do events at weekends and evenings and stuff, if I do that kind of thing, she'll make sure I take time elsewhere in the week to balance that out. My mum used to say when I was younger that I had a tendency to not just burn my candle at both ends, but cut my candle in half and burn it at all four ends. And I think I've learned not to do that, because if I'm really frank, I burned out once in my career before, and it was probably the darkest time of my life. And I'm determined not to go back there again. And I know the signs in myself when I'm heading in that direction. So my team work really hard to make sure I don't overwork, because there's never any end to the work. Life is really hard for children in this country. I've worked with kids for nearly 30 years. It's never been this hard. We've got 4.5 million kids in this country in poverty. We've got over 1 million who are at risk of exploitation and harm. We've got 1 million who don't have enough food to eat. Another 1 million who don't have the right housing. We've got over 1 million children who are waiting for mental health support. It's never been this hard. And so the last thing the Children's Society needs from me is to be burned out, knackered, because what then happens is I then become irritable and annoyable and annoy everybody. And that really is not what anybody wants. So boundaries are really important, and I have to be quite strict about that.
And by the same token, how do you ensure that the people who are working for you, or the Children's Society employees, are also adhering to those same rules, and they're not kind of getting into the same positions that you described?
That's why leadership matters, because it's all well and good to write down stuff about culture and boundaries and well-being. If I'm not modelling that as their chief executive, if I'm working every hour God sends, if I'm sending emails at 9:30 at night, then I'm sending a subliminal message to the organisation. That's the behaviour I expect from everybody else. So I am really quite intentional about making sure when I'm on holiday, nobody hears from me. I am completely out of the loop. I trust my colleagues who are absolutely fantastic to run the organisation, and I don't get involved. Likewise, if I'm in the evenings, I don't send emails unless it's a complete, absolute emergency. I have to model the behaviours that I want everyone else, and I want all of my colleagues to be taking their leave. I want them to be prioritising their well-being, not sitting at a screen all day long. I want them to know that the Children's Society loves them and cares for them. We want them to thrive in their role. My rather naive ambition for all of our staff is I want them to look back on their career at their retirement and whatever else they do with themselves. I want them to see the window that they worked at the Children's Society as the best work of their lives. I want it to be the place they felt loved and cherished, that they had the right tools to do their job, that they felt held and supported, given the permission to look after their well-being and their mental health, and also they deliver fantastic work that changes children's lives. That's my ambition for all of our people, and it's also my ambition for me.
You've painted a very vivid picture about the huge scale of the demand facing you as a charity and the problems that you're trying to overcome and solve. It's the same for practically every other charity at the moment. And as you say, the past couple of years have taken a significant toll for leaders across the sector. There are many who have decided to move on and go into a less demanding role. Do you have any thoughts on solutions at the systemic level of how these knackered leaders can be better supported?
I think trustee boards have an important role. When you're the chief executive, you've got sort of this unique position where you've got relationships upwards with your board of trustees, you've got relationships with the rest of your organisation. I'm very fortunate that I feel huge levels of support from our board. That doesn't mean they agree with me all of the time. It doesn't mean they give me an easy time all the time. Quite rightly, they don't. But I feel held and supported by my trustees. And that's a really important first step. I think trustees need to know, if they don't already, the pressure that third sector leaders are facing right around the country right now, and to be intentional about finding ways to ensure that their chief exec and their senior leadership teams are looking after themselves and prioritising their well-being. I think secondly, and sometimes these are the things that get knocked out because everyone's so busy, is being intentional about creating space to network with your peers and build networks of your peers where you can have proper conversations. Not where you show up and boast about how great you are and how great your organisation is, but real safe spaces where you can say how you feel and what's going on in your world. Often when we're really busy, those are the things that get set down because we think that's not important. We have to prioritise being together as leaders, and it's like coals in a fire. If you put your coal into a fire, it's more likely to glow more for a longer time. And I think the third thing is there are organisations out there like Akivo and others which provide networking opportunities, conferences, I make a priority every year of being at the Akivo conference because I get to meet a pile of people who I've never met before. And we discover we have so much in common, whatever our sector, whether it's the animal sector, the health sector, the kids sector, we're dealing with the same stuff. And so I think that's really important. And bluntly, take your holiday. I know so many of my colleagues who just don't take leave. It's not a good role model to the rest of the organization, and it's not looking after your heart and your soul. So yeah, I think there are ways we can protect ourselves better. Also, I think for me, I can only do what I do because I spend so much time with young people. I spend so much time in our services around the country. I see the change happening in children's lives in front of my eyes. And that then fires me up for when I'm having a really difficult meeting or struggling with a pension deficit, whatever the issue is. I remember why we're doing this. We're doing it because around the country, hundreds of Children's Societies team are changing children's lives every single day. And that's the fire that sort of drives me.
And what about the whole sector and the way that the sector is structured? Do you think there could be a need to perhaps change governance arrangements at a much bigger level?
Yes, is the simple answer to that question. I think if ever Rudolph were to walk back into the Children's Society 144 years later after he set us up, I don't think he'd be surprised at our governance. It's probably the same as it was back then. We have boards that meet quarterly, we've got committees, we've got papers and agendas. The model of charity governance hasn't really changed since the Victorian era. And I think we as a sector need a conversation with our regulator, the Charity Commission. What does governance look like in this fast-moving, agile, fluid world? And also, how do we recruit more people into charity governance from more diverse backgrounds? How many boards meet 9 to 4 in a day? Who can do that? Who can do that? A teacher can't do that. A nurse can't do that. A fire person can't do that, or a police officer. We end up with people who either are in very senior roles who can play with their diary and make things happen, or we end up with people who are at a particular stage in life where they've stepped back from full-time work and they've got more capacity, which is really valuable. But I think we need a more diverse trusteeship, and that means we need to look at how governance is done.
So are there particular changes that you would like to see at a kind of more macro governance level?
I'd like to encourage a conversation with our sector and with the Charity Commission about how do we get a more diverse set of people in charity governance. Part of that will be, I think, how boards are structured and whether they meet more regularly for less time rather than big, long chunks every quarter or twice or 3 times a year. I'd like to look at whether I don't know how many charities meet during business hours, but we should be meeting in the evenings and the weekends. I'm still having that conversation with my own board to try and encourage them to. And obviously, if we work at weekends, that's not the greatest thing for the charity's staff. But the bottom line is we're here to serve the trustees, not the other way around. So any way that can help us create more diversity in charity governance and younger people coming into the trustee roles, people from different backgrounds and different parts of the country. There is a tendency in charities like ours that are rooted in London that most of our trustees come from London and the home counties. We need to be finding ways using digital tools and others to widen that. So I think we all could do with a conversation about how we make charity governance more modern and more agile for a different world.
And to take that a step further, do you think that charity regulation is fit for the 21st century in its current form?
I think it's always dangerous for a chief exec to talk about the regulator. I think, I think that, ultimately the regulator has a very important job. I lead a team of people who are entrusted to steward millions of pounds of money that is donated to us by the public, who expect that to be used in the best possible way to deliver the biggest change in children's lives. It's entirely appropriate that we are put to very high standards of compliance and governance. And I think that the Charity Commission has a phenomenally huge job, and they probably haven't got enough resource with which to do it.
You mentioned the struggles of COVID and the revenue implications of having to close all of your charity shops for a period of time. Next year, you'll be launching the biggest fundraising appeal in your history.
That's correct.
Tell us a bit about that, and particularly how you're looking to attract new supporters.
When I became chief executive of the Children's Society in 2019, I did a family fortunes exercise, went around the office and I asked, and in different locations, different offices, and I asked people, what's our vision, what's our goal? And nobody really could nail it for me. And I always believe that organizations thrive when everybody knows the direction and everyone's bought into the vision. And there are two ways to write a vision and a strategy. And one is that some people in important jobs lock themselves in a room with flip charts and Post-it notes and Sharpie pens, and we write something and we tell everybody else what it is. And the other is to dare to believe in the hearts and minds of every one of your team there are ideas and energy and creativity. And so for the first 3 months I did this job, we traveled the length and breadth of the country and met as many of our staff as we could, as many volunteers, young people, supporters. And we asked them, what should the Children's Society fight for in this next new decade, 2020, 2030? And it emerged with elegant clarity. We publish the Good Childhood Report every year. It's the single biggest piece of research into children's lives. And we have marked over the last 15 years a continual decline in children's well-being and children's happiness in this country, to the point that now last year's Good Childhood Report shows we have the most unhappy children out of 27 countries in all of Europe. So that's the strategy, is by the end of 2030, we want to turn that around. That's our simple strategy. We want by 2030 British kids to be happier and more hopeful and more resilient and more optimistic. We got to 2024 with all of the stuff that had happened in COVID, all of the challenges in our world. And we realized in our Good Childhood Report in 2024 that we were further away from achieving that goal by 2030 than we were when we set it in 2020. And so we had a sort of senior team away day, and we talked to our trustees, and we realized that what we wanted to do was, to put it bluntly, to throw the kitchen sink at this. All of us who work with children know what works. The earlier you intervene in a child's life, the better the outcome, the cheaper the outcome, and that child has a much happier and fulfilled life. At the moment, around 90p of every pound the NHS spends on children's mental health is spent on crisis intervention, but A&E haven't taken a razor blade to their flesh. We wait until that child spirals out of control, and then suddenly we help them. Everybody knows if you help that child way down the track much earlier, that wouldn't have happened. The thing is that there's nobody commissioning that kind of work. So we persuaded our board to invest £1 million in creating the first of its kind open access mental health hub in the country. And we opened it in the London borough of Newham last year, designed with young people. And it helps around 1,000 young people at the moment with their mental health and well-being, and around about 300 families and parents. The major appeal is that we want to scale that. We want to take that model and we want to scale it around the country and build a network of hubs that truly meet the need of thousands and thousands and thousands of children before they reach crisis. Then what we want to do is we want to evidence that with our new impact measurement framework. We want to show that this works. And then when we've got that data together and we've got that compelling case, we want to put it in front of the Secretaries of State for Health and Education and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, if we can get an appointment, and say to her, if you were to say, talk's sake, put £1 billion into this kind of hub, you will save the NHS and children's social care 4, 5, 6 billion over here. So that's the plan. So next spring, we will launch publicly this major appeal to invite the public to join us on this journey to truly change children's mental health in this country once and for all, so that by 2030, British kids are happier and more hopeful. I can think of no more significant task for our age. Gordon Brown said that children are 20% of our present, 100% of our future. And right now, this country is failing children. It can't be right that in the 6th richest country in the world, that we have the lowest happiness out of 27 European countries. We've got to change this. And the Children's Society is going to throw the kitchen sink at it next year. We're going to be on the telly, we're going to be on the radio, we're going to encourage as many new people to join us on this journey with their voice, with their money, and let's give every British child the best start in life.
Sounds very exciting.
And terrifying.
Well, it's always good to have that to get you going. So are there any particular groups among the population that you're trying to reach that you haven't had a great deal of contact with before? Like
a lot of charities our age, we're 144. Our donor base is skewed toward the older end of the population. And I got to tell you, there is not a week goes by somebody somewhere in the country doesn't write to me about how much they love the Children's Society. And I am overwhelmingly really moved by these people who've supported us for 20, 30, 40. I signed some volunteering certificates last week for people who've volunteered for 50 years in the Children's Society. I mean, goodness me, that's as long as I've been alive. So we've got phenomenal roots, right? But we need to recruit more younger supporters. We need to recruit more Gen Zs. And I think there's a number of people who are public sector workers, who work in schools, who work in social care, who work in hospitals, who see the stuff we're talking about every day. We want to give them some hope that there is a solution to this and that we can actually shift the dial on children's mental health in this country. So we're primarily going to focus it at trying to reach more younger people and reach people probably with public sector backgrounds as well. So we've got a number of strategies lined up to try and maximize our income in a number of different streams. You mentioned earlier our shops. Our retail arm is phenomenal. We've got 104 shops around the country, and we want to grow that over the next number of years as well. Because our shops are amazing. Not just do they raise all this money for our work, but every one of them is like a community resource in itself. You know, there are people there volunteering who've lost a loved one, who are lonely. There are others who've got, mental health challenges. Our shops provide a real resource for the community, and they raise a pile of money. So we're going to try and grow some more of those as well.
And in terms of this big appeal, have you got some big numbers that you're going to have to hit? What
Yes.
are your targets, and how do they compare with previous kind of massive appeals?
The numbers are very big, Andy. We want to raise £100 million of fresh resource by 2030. It's just a massive number.
Yes.
And I said to somebody the other day, this is without question the most exciting and terrifying thing I've ever done in my career. But I've said to all of my colleagues in the Children's Society, we're just not prepared to accept how life is for children in this country. And we want to change it. And that demands a lot from us as an organisation. And we know that I passionately believe that social change happens when leaders don't care who takes the credit. And I want the Children's Society to continue to be a generous organisation that partners and collaborates with lots of other organisations, and we fight together for the change that we want to see. You know, we work really closely with our friends in the other big children's charities. We've been part of the Children's Charities Coalition with our friends at Barnardo's and Action and NSPCC and the National Children's Bureau. We work really closely with partners like Trussell and others around poverty. So we want to be a collaborator and a generous partner as we fight for the big systemic change that children need. I suppose what gets me out of bed every morning, we talked at the start of this conversation about how hard it is to be a charity leader, and it is. But I always sort of remind people, I did sign up for this. You know, I did apply for the job, you know. I put myself forward for it, you know, so this is the job. But what gets me out of bed every single morning is the conviction at the bottom of my heart that every child in this country, regardless of their background or their postcode or their parents' salary, they deserve a good childhood. They deserve to be in a decent home with people who love them, to be free from abuse and harm, to be able to have enough food on their table and heat in their radiator at wintertime, to be hopeful and be the best version of themselves, to love who they want to love. And so that's what gets me out of bed every morning, is that conviction. So yes, it's hard in our sector. Yes, there's challenges and the numbers make my head hurt sometimes. But my God, as I look around the whole third sector, I am extraordinarily proud to be part of it. Every day, right around our sector, thousands of people turn up as volunteers or staff to make the world a better place. And it's an absolute privilege to be part of that movement to make our country a better place.
And in terms of the numbers that you just talked about there, I mean, that's like, I think you said before that the charity's annual income is something in the region of 40 odd million.
Yeah.
So it's a big increase on that. Are you having to make some changes within the organisation in terms of where you allocate resources and kind of gearing up for that big appeal?
Yeah, I mean, like all organisations, we've had our challenges with income and costs, which is costs just continue to just go up and up and up. So we had a tough year last year. We made some significant changes to our structure. We had to say goodbye to a number of colleagues, brilliant people who'd worked with us for a long time, because we needed to make sure that our financial base was strong. And as we go forward into this next year that lies ahead, yes, we have had to make changes. So the board have approved some investment from our reserves of new people in our high value fundraising end of the organisation. We've just made a whole swathe of new recruitments in that space. And we've also had, as leaders of the organisation, to be really clear on making sure we are one team and we're working collaboratively across the organisation. The scale of the ambition of this appeal will only work if our entire organisation is behind it. It cannot be an add-on to what we already do. It's got to be what we do. And that's meant we've had to make sure we're really clear on our prioritisation. Because like every charity, the biggest challenge we have is what to say no to, what to stop doing, what to pause. We're terrible at it, because there's just so much to do. So we've had to be really intentional about saying, no, we can't do this right now. We're going to have to focus on this. As senior team leaders, we've been really intentional about what are the key things we need to have a line of sight to over the next 12 months. What are the key tasks the organisation needs of us? When we did our recent staff survey, around 90% of our workforce said that they were really excited by the ambition of the organisation. So that's a good place to start. And we'll build on that over the course of the year so that everybody feels they're part of this journey.
And then with your work with other charities in the children and youth space, it's great to hear about the collaboration you've been doing. And I know that this sector specifically often comes up in conversation as one where charities are working together really effectively. Yeah. And I've been looking into openness around reporting results, and particularly the results that people wouldn't necessarily want to blow their trumpet about because perhaps things haven't gone as well. But it's very important that you share those learnings in order to save your peers from going down the same route potentially. But collaboration is often easier said than done. So I wonder, what are your principles? How are you achieving effective collaboration with other children's charities?
It's a good place to start when the chief executives like each other. And so we do. Part of that was sort of forged in the fire of COVID, is that the scale of the issues that were facing children back then was just so significant. So part of it is the really strong relationships at chief exec level. But ultimately, it's what I said earlier. It's when leaders don't care who takes the credit. The big thing we're all campaigning for right now is the lifting of the 2-child benefit cap. It's the single biggest thing the government could do to lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. If that happens, if another organisation wants to say that was their hard work, I'm not going to be offended by that. Ultimately, children are going to be out of poverty. That's what we're all about. And let's be frank, there are chief executives listening to this. You don't apply to be a chief exec unless you've got a certain sense of ego, all right? You just don't do it. Let's be frank about that. And I admit I've got one too. But if you're going to make real social change happen and real collaboration, I've got to set that down. It's not about Mark Russell's ego. It's not about the Children's Society's ego and our brand. It's about social change that changes the lives of children. And if somebody else claims the credit for that, fine, that's okay. So I think it's got to be that. And it's got to be that as a leader, you are cascading that culture right through your organization so that everybody in the organization approaches collaboration in the same way. It can't be about territory. It can't be about, though they've parked their tank on our lawn, it can't be about that. It's got to be about together we want to make change happen. So it's strong relationships at chief exec level. It's being really clear on the change you want to see and what each person brings to the table. And it's about leaders cascading that through their organization so that the whole organization approaches partnership and collaboration in the same way.
And that's a sentiment that was absolutely echoed by Emma Reevey from Trussell on this podcast just 2 weeks ago. So
she models that beautifully.
And I'm not going to ask you to name names, but do you see others in the sector who don't follow that approach?
Yes, I do. And it drives me to distraction, frankly. Because, look, I think it's really important that I say as the chief executive of the Children's Society, I dream of a day that I can shut this organisation down, right? I dream of that day. So our vision is very simple. Society is built for all children. When that happens, shut us down. And I think if you listen to some leaders, we don't have a right to exist. You know, we only exist because there's a huge problem in society we're trying to fix. My ambition is to do myself out of a job. I can't do it on my own. The Children's Society is a great organisation. We're fantastic, but we can't do it on our own. We need Bernardo's, we need NSPCC, we need Action for Children. We need the 20,000 other kids' charities around this country who day in, day out make a difference in children's lives. We've got to do it together. And that means egos on the floor or at the door and children and young people first. And that's back to what I told you was my driving conviction, is that life is too hard right now for children in this country. And that demands a different kind of leadership from us that is collaborative, that is generous, that is sacrificial, that is brave, that speaks truth to power and builds coalitions that one big voice can argue for the big change children need.
And beyond ditching your ego, both your personal one and the one of your organisation, any other tips on ways of making working together easy and worthwhile and effective?
I do think the relationships at chief exec level are really important. And I would say chief execs having fun together is a big thing. So we have a little WhatsApp group among the chief execs of the biggest children's charities. We have a lot of fun on it. We talk about important things. Of course we do. We have a bit of fun as well. Shout out to my friend Lynn Perry from Bernardo's, who always winds me up and makes fun of me. And that's what, that's what makes this work, is I know Lynn gets up in the morning with the same conviction I've got. And she's leading a phenomenal organisation. When I started the Children's Society, I heard somebody in a meeting describing Bernardo's as a competitor. I said, I never want to hear that language again. They're not our competitors. They're our pals. They're our friends. They're making a massive difference. If we show up at a ministerial meeting, the five of us, the big five children's charities, it's quite hard for a minister to ignore the voices of Britain's five largest children's charities sitting in the same room as pals saying the same thing. If you look at the Children's Charities Coalition that we set up before the general election, we set out a number of different things that we wanted to see in party manifestos. Nearly all of them made their way into the Labour Party manifesto. In fact, the sentence we urged Labour to put into their manifesto was that a society is judged by the well-being of its children. It's right at the start of the Labour Party manifesto. So our job now is to hold the government to account for what they said they'd do and to lift kids out of poverty and to make sure children get the right support. But bluntly, in all of the years I've worked with children, as a society, we do not have a strategy for childhood in this country. We just don't. And I think we should have one that joins together all the arms of government, schools, and say, how do we make sure children thrive? And that needs collaboration. It needs leadership. And that's why collaboration is not an add-on to what I do. It's fundamentally central to my understanding of my calling as a leader.
And on the note of collaboration, particularly with government, I wanted to ask you about the Civil Society Covenant, obviously launched a couple of months ago with a big fanfare. Charity leaders seem relatively hopeful that it will improve the relationship between the sector and government? What's your take on it?
That event was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. Half the cabinet turned up, including the Prime Minister, to speak to us as a group of civil society leaders. If that doesn't make a statement about how governments see us, it really does. I should say, declaring an interest, the Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy, is a former Children's Society employee, and we're very proud of her as our alumni. But I think it was a really good day. I think the quality of engagement with the government, with society, was really visible in that room. In the last year, I've had really significant engagement at the top of this government around the issues that children face. I've seen that already being lived out. I've said to the government there are things they could do really quickly to improve charities' lives that wouldn't cost a huge amount of money. The biggest one I've said to them is they could change how they commission services. I live in a county where my council have just re-tendered bins for 20 years. So I don't understand, if we can tend bins for 20 years, why can we not tend children's services for 5? So what happens is we win a contract for 18 months, 2 years. So a year in, we've got to put our staff at risk of redundancy. We then go through a whole retendering process, costs thousands of pounds. If we win it, great. We take our people out of redundancy. If we lose it, they get chupied to somebody else. The sign on the wall gets changed. Everyone changes their T-shirt and the service continues as before. The government are still paying for it. A simple thing they could do that would transform our finances overnight would be just to extend commissioning periods. What would then happen is that us as charities would invest more in those services because we know we're going to keep them for a while longer. And the quality of that service to the children who receive it would go up. That would not cost the government a bean more. So those are the conversations we're having with Downing Street to say, look, those are the sort of things you could do in a fiscally tight environment that would improve charities' accounts and budgets overnight.
Are there particular changes to the covenant itself that you would like to have seen?
No, I don't think so. I think let's review it in a year's time and see how charities are feeling about their engagement with government. But I have to say, thus far, my engagement with Downing Street, with secretaries of state, with ministers, has been really, really significant. Take child poverty. I couldn't get a meeting with a minister to talk about child poverty under the last administration. We also had 8 secretaries of state for education and about 6 children's ministers in about 3 years. So there was a continual churn of ministers in toward the closing ends of the Conservative government. But I couldn't get a meeting on poverty. 4 weeks after the general election, I was sat in Liz Kendall's office in the Department for Work and Pensions with Ali McGovern, her Minister of State, talking about child poverty. It's that intentionality that we saw pretty much from the beginning of the new government. And that's not saying that one government are great and one government aren't. It's one government were new and full of energy and wanted to change the world. The other ones had been through a whole series of difficult years and were probably quite tired. So our job is to work with all of those governments to keep children on the agenda. So I've seen really good engagement, but let's look at it in a year's time and see if the government have kept their side of the bargain.
Yes, we wait and see, but it definitely sounds optimistic.
Yeah, I'm hopeful.
Which leads very nicely onto the mantra of your founder,
yes,
which is, well, perhaps I'll let you say it.
Well, when I took this job, the Children's Society wasn't just sort of the next sort of mark on my career. I've been a Children's Society donor and campaigner for 20 years, and I waited patiently for this job to come up. And when I got it, I went to the little church in South London where Edward Rudolph, our founder, was a Sunday school teacher. And I was trying to think of what life looked like for him. And I came out of that church with 2 words in my mind that I felt summed up his DNA. One was anger, that life's too difficult for too many children in this country. And the other was hope, a real sense that we could do something about it. I've encouraged the Children's Society to live with those 2 words in the creative tension that they exist in. Because anger by itself is not very helpful. You've got to do something with that anger and use it to power change. And so anger and hope are the 2 words that drive us today. They're the same words, I think, that drove our founder. And I had the privilege of meeting his 2 great-grandchildren, his surviving great-grandchildren, over the course of the last year. And when I said those 2 words to them, they went, yeah, that sounds just like Edward. So I think any organisation that gets to be as old as us, we're 144, needs to remind itself why it first started. And we started because our founder saw the injustice facing children in Victorian England, and he was angry about it and determined to do something about it. And that's what we're holding on to today. I think if Mr. Rudolph were to walk into one of our offices or one of our shops or one of our services, I think he'd think 2 things. I think he'd think, oh my goodness me, I'm so extraordinarily proud. Something I set up all those years ago has become this huge organisation with nearly 900 staff and all this amazing work. But I actually think Mr. Rudolph might be more angry today than he was then, because life is still hard for children. There are 4.6 million children in poverty in this country. We're going to hold those two words, anger and hope, and fight for a better future for kids.
And then stepping back from the children's space specifically, what are your reasons to be optimistic?
I am optimistic because young people inspire me. The stuff that young people deal with in our services every day, and yet they're resilient and they stand tall. So young people inspire me and fill me with hope. And I'm also filled with hope by the hundreds of thousands of people around this country, whatever part of the third sector they support, every month, give money, give their time, because they too want to change the world. People are fundamentally good, and I believe that. And they give me hope.
Brilliant. Well, Mark, it's been such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Mark, and that's it for this episode. Next week, we'll be joined by Paul Wynyard from the Fundraising Regulator. So if you want to know what you need to do before the new fundraising code comes into effect in November, this is definitely one for you. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Nav Pal.